Good morning, YouTube. Today, I'm going to show you how to operate a flappy paddle gearbox.
Can't stop, won't stop. I can't stop, won't stop. I can't stop, won't stop. Can't stop.
So are you recording all of the nefarious activities?
If you're new to my channel, my name is Dan, this is my Ferrari 458, and we do a lot of interesting videos about what it's like to own a supercar, how to maintain them, how to work on them, even buying and selling them. In fact, I even offer free selling services through my website, so if you want to list your car for sale, if it's a supercar, go to my website, normalguysupercar.com, and you can list your car totally free. I want to just thank you for watching my videos. I do appreciate it tremendously, so if you enjoy these videos, please hit that subscribe button and like button. It helps me out, and I do appreciate it, so again, thank you very much. First thing we gotta do is actually kind of define a flappy paddle gearbox. So I'm sure hopefully you know how a manual gearbox works. You have an actual manual transmission with the stick shift and a clutch. So when you use those transmissions, you obviously have to physically operate the clutch with your foot, shift the gearbox manually with your hand. So I'm not 100% sure which car is the first to be considered to have the true flappy paddle gearbox, but I do know that the Ferrari 355 was one of the first commercially available cars with a flappy paddle gearbox.
Jizz in my pants.
Oh my God, that's glorious. That was a single clutch transmission. And so, first of all, what is a single clutch transmission? So basically what happened was they took a manual gearbox with an actual manual transmission and a clutch and all that stuff, and they effectively threw a bunch of hydraulic actuators and computer controls on that transmission.
A hydraulic actuator consists of a cylinder or fluid motor that uses hydraulic power to facilitate mechanical operation.
To shift the transmission, you just clicked a paddle. So when you click the paddle, the computer actually tells the clutch to disengage. A hydraulic actuator then actually pushes the shift linkage in the transmission, effectively changing the gears for you, and then another hydraulic actuator is operating the clutch, engaging it and disengaging it. It has a lot to do with how the computers manage the system, because you're not effectively controlling the transmission. You're effectively just giving it electronic signals, which then the computer translates into actual physical operation of the transmission. Initially, these single clutch gearboxes were not the most refined things. The clutches tended to get worn out a little bit faster than you would if you operated the clutch yourself. Shifting kind of sometimes is a bit herky-jerky, and certainly operating the cars in slow speeds like in traffic could be a little bit wonky, because you're effectively trying to tell the computer how to drive the car like a manual transmission. It has a lot to do with how much throttle you're giving it. It tells the computer how much to engage or disengage the clutch, whether or not you're pushing the brake. All those sorts of things all factor in and make it so that the driving experience of the early single clutch transmissions can be a little bit wonky, but they've refined those pretty substantially over the years. So now even the Lamborghini Aventador has a single clutch transmission. And you kind of wonder why, if the technology has improved so much, are they still using a single clutch transmission? And part of that is actually weight savings. The single clutch transmission is a very light gearbox, and they've been pretty much proven technology. They are very robust. They know how to make them work really well and handle a lot of horsepower and torque. Just like a lot of manual gearboxes, they sometimes are really effective at transferring the power. They have less parasitic loss typically. So it's a good transmission when you're talking about performance, but it comes at the cost of speed. So obviously technology's evolved, and now the next transmission available that we consider the flappy paddle gearbox is what's called the dual clutch transmission. So a dual clutch transmission, which obviously came out a little bit after the single clutch transmission, it's still an actual mechanically operated transmission with hydraulic actuators, but it's designed from the start to be operated by the computer, not having some manual transmission with bolted on apparatus. So it's not starting its life off as a manual transmission. It is designed from the start to be a flappy paddle gearbox. There is no dual clutch transmission that you operate manually on the clutch with your foot. They just don't exist. And why is that? Well, because you do actually have two clutches. Yes, dual clutch means two clutches. So how is that actually working? It gets a little bit tricky. One clutch is engaged while one clutch is disengaged. So for example, the Ferrari 458 has a dual clutch transmission, and what that means is when the car is in first gear and you're driving along in first gear, the clutch for first gear is obviously engaged, and so you're driving through first gear. There's a second clutch that's disengaged, which has second gear set up on that shaft. So as soon as you click the flappy paddle, all that happens is the first gear clutch disengages and the second gear clutch engages. And at the same time as that happens, the first gear then is shifted to third gear. And then that clutch is still disengaged. So then when you click it again and go from second to third, disengages the second gear clutch and engages the third gear clutch. I know it's getting complicated. So obviously then when you're going downshift, that's why downshifts are a little bit slower, because you only have two clutches and they're kind of usually set up to go upwards. So when you're going upwards, the shifts are typically a little bit faster. The downshifts are typically just a little bit slower. So effectively what this means is that the dual clutch transmissions have a few massive advantages and one major disadvantage. The disadvantage is, of course, weight. You have a second clutch system, so obviously the transmission is going to weigh substantially more. The big advantages are obviously shifts are extremely fast. And another big advantage is typically the clutch life, as you can imagine, since you have two clutches, is a lot longer because you're not having to engage and disengage one clutch for every single gear. In essence, you're doubling the clutch life at a minimum, probably more so because the technology's advanced a lot more and they've figured out how to make the clutches engage and disengage in a lot more effective ways that don't burn out the clutches as much. So a common question that's asked about either of these systems is, do you have to let off the gas when shifting the transmission? And the answer is, it depends. So some of the early F1 transmissions and some of the early single clutch transmissions, you do want to release the gas pedal just a little bit because the throttle controls weren't fly-by-wire. So in later versions of these cars that had the single clutch transmissions, for example, the Ferrari F430, you can keep your foot all the way to the floor, and because it's a drive-by-wire system for the throttles, the computer will actually engage and disengage the throttle a little bit, feathering the engine so that it's effectively managing the engine and clutch simultaneously for you. Sorry, my floor is making noises. So on some of the older systems, if you don't let off the gas just a little bit, you may end up like having a blip in the throttle or having it rev a bit too much. Pretty much all of the dual clutch transmissions, it doesn't matter. You can keep your foot to the floor. Same goes for decelerating and downshifting. Some of the systems you do want to actually let off the gas. Others, you can actually blip the throttle for you. But typically on anything that's pretty modern, don't do all that. The computer is going to manage it for you. There's no reason for you to try and actively manage the throttle. It's not doing anything. The computer's overriding your inputs. And of course, another common question is, you have flappy pedals on an automatic gearbox. Does that mean it's an actual flappy pedal transmission? Well, not by the definition of flappy pedals being manual transmissions that are operated by hydraulic actuator systems. Yes, a lot of the modern cars that have an actual automatic transmission have flappy pedals to allow you to manually control the transmission. That's generally not what people think of when they think of a flappy pedal transmission. So typically, if you say flappy pedal transmission, you're talking about a single clutch transmission or a dual clutch transmission. Although it's a bit ambiguous of a term, technically speaking, if you say I have flappy pedals, it could refer to any of those three types of transmissions. A more accurate description would be saying single clutch, dual clutch, or automatic transmission. And obviously, automatic transmissions have a torque converter instead of clutches. So one other thing to consider about these flappy pedal gearboxes is that typically they have the ability to drive it like an automatic transmission. And what I mean by that is there's usually a button or a mode that you can engage or disengage. That means that the computer is just going to take care of it for you. You don't even have to click the paddles. It's just going to shift for you. Another weird thing is that some of these cars actually have a park button. Others do not. So it totally depends on the manufacturer and what model car you're dealing with. For example, in the Ferrari 458, there is no park button. To park the car, you simply turn it off. In the Ferrari F430, 360, and even the 355, there's no park button, but the way that you're supposed to operate that transmission is you leave it in gear, just like you would have in the old days in a manual transmission. You want to leave it in a first gear or reverse, so it's a very sturdy gear, and that way the car doesn't roll. So now, hopefully you understand what the transmissions are a little bit better and how they work. Let's go out for a quick drive, and I'll show you how to actually work the transmission in this Ferrari 458 with the dual clutch transmission. Okay, so we're in the Ferrari 458, and as you can see, we have the wonderful flappy pedals. There is the upshift pedal on the right side. There is the downshift pedal on the left side. And then we have the reverse button here. And of course, then we have the auto buttons. The auto button controls whether or not the transmission behaves just like a regular automatic. Basically, if automatic mode is on, the transmission will shift for you. Then you don't have to use the flappy paddles. If automatic is off, you must use the flappy paddles. To get this car into neutral, you actually pull the left and right paddles simultaneously, and that will actually put the car in neutral. But when you first start the car, as you'll see in a second, it's going to go into park. So we'll first turn on the car. So I'm going to turn the key forward. You can see it's already in park, and we already have the automatic mode engaged on this car. So this car starts with auto. Some of the other cars start with automatic mode off. It just depends on the car. So we're going to start the car, put my foot on the brake, and push the ignition button. Alright, so the car is running. So as I mentioned, if I wanted to get it into reverse, I would push the reverse button while my foot is on the brake. And as you can see, now the car goes into reverse. If I wanted to go forward, I would pull the right hand paddle. So when I pull that, you can see it now goes into 1, which is basically first gear. In automatic mode, it will still tell you what gear you're in, so that's why it says 1. It doesn't say just drive or something like that. The car behaves just like an actual manual transmission, so it will not start rolling. Yes, it will not start rolling until you actually push your foot on the gas. Like I mentioned, what's fascinating is you do actually have to push the accelerator for this car to start moving forward. Some of these dual clutch and single clutch cars, you release the brake and the car starts moving forward. Some of them you do have to actually push the gas. It just depends on the manufacturer. Each manufacturer has it behave in different ways. The Lamborghini I drove recently, you released the brake and it immediately started rolling forward. So far, all the Ferraris I've driven, you release the brake and it just sits there like it's a manual transmission. All right, here we go. We'll start. So I'll start accelerating and then we'll push the right paddle. You can see it goes to second gear. Start decelerating. You see, I'm not touching the accelerator at all. It's automatically rev matching the car. Pretty simple. So what's interesting is if I do not actually downshift and I come to a stop, you'll see it's actually going to go down to 1. So there it goes. So certain transmissions do this, other transmissions do not. It depends on the car manufacturer again. So in Ferrari, if you start slowing down and you do not downshift the paddles, it will automatically start downshifting the gears for you as the RPMs get too low. So you don't have to necessarily downshift when you're coming to a stop, for example. I like to do it just because it makes that fun sound and gives you a little bit of engine braking. Alright, so we're emerged on the highway and hopefully get a clearing where I can actually open it up a little bit. Show you what happens when you give it the beans. Here we go. Rough right there. I think my wheels were catching air. Different manufacturers choose to put the flappy paddles in different positions. Ferrari is one of the cars that puts the flappy paddles on the column of the steering wheel, so they don't actually put it on the steering wheel. I know Porsche loves to put the flappy paddles on the steering wheel itself. A matter of preference, I think the argument for having it on the steering wheel is then if you keep your hands on the sides like mine are right now, when you turn the steering wheel, the flappy pedal is always right there. What I found is that if you're shifting while turning, it sometimes disorients your brain. So I like having the flappy pedals mounted in a fixed position because then I always know exactly where the pedals are for upshift and downshift, no matter where the steering wheel position is. And another big advantage of having the flappy pedals over a manual transmission is that your hands do remain closer to the steering wheel. You don't have to worry about bringing your hand up and down to grab the shift lever. You can even add a little flair to your shifts. You know, yeah. Click both pedals, put in neutral, and I can give it a good rev. And then in this car, when you want it to go to park, all you have to do is turn it off and it automatically goes to park no matter what gear you're in. There we go. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this video and hopefully you learned a little bit about how to operate a flappy paddle transmission. It's a bit of an ambiguous term, but hopefully now you kind of see that there's dual clutch transmissions, single clutch transmissions, and even automatic transmissions that do have flappy pedals, although they all behave in totally different ways and operate in a different style. And even you have to drive them a bit differently. What it really comes down to is they all drive pretty good and it's all a very modern way of driving. So something you have to consider is why is it that people want to use these flappy paddles instead of the old manual gearboxes? Well, speed is one of the biggest things. Their shifts are very, very fast. In fact, they're way faster than a human can possibly shift a car. And the other thing is they generally don't screw up. Me personally, when I'm actually tracking a car, I prefer a flappy paddle gearbox. I admit, I am not skilled enough to heel toe perfectly on downshifts every single time. Lord knows I do not want to make a money shift when I'm at the drag strip. I just don't want to do that. That would suck. There are some advantages, like you don't screw up as much, you can focus more on the driving and not worrying about the shifting. A lot of people say that removes some of the driving experience and makes the cars less fun to drive, and that's a totally valid argument. And I have to agree, when you're out rowing through the gears on a nice drive out in the hills or on a twisty road, there's something magical about that, and those of us that just enjoy driving, it's a wonderful experience, and you can't get that with the flappy pedals. Ultimately, what it comes down to is you gotta try driving both and see how they are and see which ones you like better and which ones you don't. Please feel free to subscribe to my channel and like this video, possibly even share it. Those things do actually help out my channel, so I appreciate it tremendously when you guys can do that. So thank you so much. Also, I now have the ability to have a membership with my channel, which means you can get some extra perks for a small monthly fee. If you'd like to look at that and see if that's something that you're interested in, there's a little join button down by the subscribe buttons. And if you can't, don't worry about it. I'm still going to be here. I'm still going to be doing lots of cool stuff for you guys. That clock is going to be given away as soon as we hit 50,000 subscribers, which is going to be very soon. So if you're interested in winning that, like, share, and subscribe, hit the notification bell. Go to my website, normalguysupercar.com, and either buy some of my merch or sign up for my email list. If you do that, you're automatically be entered for a chance to win that clock as soon as we hit 50,000 subscribers. Do that right now. Go to normalguysupercar.com. All right, guys, we have a lot of cool car stuff coming your way, so you're going to want to stay tuned. It's going to be sweet.